And as you close your eyes, I'm going to invite you to really, really imagine if you are at the center of a web and that there are these strings of energy that are going out of you. And these are the strings of energy that you're placing your attention, all the energy that you are putting out into the world, consciously, unconsciously. And I'm going to invite you into this moment of just becoming really aware. Where are you placing your energy? Perhaps it's in the events of the day in terms of news. Perhaps it's in family members or cares and concerns or expectations or excitement about something about to happen. I'm just noticing you, asking you to invite you to be really aware. Where is your energy going? And as you begin to become aware, now I'm going to ask you to place a title on where your energy is going, as if it's the title of a book. Ah, it's the story of I can't get what I want. That's where my energy is going in this situation. So I'm inviting you to look at the situation and then the underlying energy right underneath that so you can really start to attune to what are the stories that you are consciously, unconsciously connecting to. It's the story of I make a difference. So I'm doing something with some kind of civic engagement. What is the underlying stories that are running in your relationships? The story of happiness, the story of joy. So just noticing all the different places, all the different stories that you are connected into. And now imagine calling back all the energy into your body right now. Calling it back as if you can see those threads coming, disconnecting from what they are, coming all the way back into your body. So your body now is no longer connected to all those different story beings, but fully sovereign to yourself. And so here we are coming to the great tool, the storyteller, into your being, your energy being. And I'm going to invite you to consider what called you here. We got to hear a couple of people, writing, telling their story, feeling that this is the time for your voice to be heard. And I'm going to ask you to get even more attuned to what's calling you here. Is it because there's something inside of you that's asking to come out? Or is it that you are being tapped on the shoulder by the muse, by the stories of our time, asking to come through you? It's not as if it's so either or. Or are you being asked to become a contadora, that person who's carrying the old stories into our time? So I invite you in this moment to get really clear about what you came here for. And may we make the most of this hour together in this time. And as you get clear on that, I'm going to invite you to listen to this great quote. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen, and often, too often, stories saddle us, and they ride us, and they whip us onward, and they tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. I actually don't like quotes that have this much we in them, but I'm reading someone else's words, and there's wisdom in these words. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear those stories, to question those stories, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. That quote is by Rebecca Solnit. So I invited you to begin just by noticing what are all the different stories that you are consciously or unconsciously connected to. And we're in this time together, we're going to talk about what is a story. What is a sacred story? We're going to talk a little bit about what is a myth. And all along the way, I'm going to ask you guys questions. And please know that I am really asking. I love to hear your voice. I love to hear your ideas. And what happens is that you start feeding the content. And as you are tuned to what you're really looking for and ask those questions, I will shape our time according to the interests of those who are here with us. Um, A little bit about my story is that I came from a farm in Vermont, and I grew up moving between Vermont, Virginia, and New York City, being very attuned to both what is it to live in the wild places and what is it to live in these city urban environments. And I got very attuned to listening at a very young age because I spent a lot of time alone. And I really believe that as storytellers, it's actually your first task is to become a listener. I became intimate with stories because they really saved my life many times. I was always a new kid in town, and they gave me this place to find sanctuary. They gave me a way to get away from it all. And I began to learn the responsibility of storytelling when the very first play that I ever wrote was produced into a storytelling festival. It was about the suicide of a dear friend. And I learned the responsibility that what we put out into the world comes back. Because as I shared the grief and the sense making that I was going through at that time, then people began to share their grief and their sense making at the same time. I learned the power of storytelling when I moved. I studied theater as a young person. All through high school, I ended up going straight to New York City and studying professionally a neighborhood playhouse and worked off Broadway. And I learned that there was this power, that there was this thing that happened in the room, this energy, this aliveness. And I became very fascinated with that. And I really wanted to understand how to harness it. I went on to really understanding like how to combine my love of the arts with also my love of social justice and environmental protection. And as I did that, I became more and more attuned to. I ended up getting a master's in social work. I got a degree in wilderness leadership and experiential education, and those pieces gave me an understanding of how to work with groups, how to work with community. And as I began to kind of come into this greater question of like, how do you be in service of this time? I really believe that before we could go save the earth, we needed to save ourselves. I put this all in quotation marks because I don't think anything needs saving anymore at this point where I am in my life. But at this point, as I was on that journey, I ended up working with Al Gore, and I produced and hosted the Green Channel at his television network. And there I got to work with this great piece of inquiry, which was I really believed that if we gave people the information that would give them the inspiration, that would move them to motivation, that would move them to activation. And what I learned in that job was by looking at all the data that people don't respond to data. And there's actually a lot of science about this. If you ever get to be in a room where people start, you know, spouting lots of facts and information, all the energy in the room goes, whoosh, it kind of sinks, you know, because we can't metabolize information. We are made of story, and we metabolize and we make meaning through story. So something about doing that liberated me. And it gave me the full freedom to come into the truth of what I was around story. And I dove deeper and deeper and deeper into it and really began to understand that story is a mystery school all into itself. And as I lived with that prayer of how to be alive in this time and how to really serve these times, that story was that prayer was literally answered through a story. And this great big story came for me. And I never wanted to write a novel. The next thing I knew, I was writing a big book series. So I'm changing up my intro because we've got a bunch of people here that have heard a lot of it. So I'm adding a little bit, which I wouldn't normally. But that book series really taught me about how stories are alive and how they have their own uh, intention, how they have their own life force, and how to come into relationship with those kinds of things in stories. So that is a little bit of my orientation in terms of um, working with story. And what I would continue to say is that I understand and come to work with story as a tool for healing, for transformation, for both the individual and for large group and the collective. And so that's the perspective that we're walking in through today. So let's start with some of the oldest knowledge on the planet. And I just love this part of it all, which is the Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or to set it into motion. So I really invite you to go see the hula if you can ever do that, or go to YouTube and see a culture that has not lost relationship with their practice of an embodied prayer. That's what the hula is. It's an embodied prayer where they understand the power of their words, can call the rains, can speak to the volcanoes. And what is it to get to hear the resonance of a culture that is still alive with the power of their voice? The Sicilians believe that words can poke holes in the universe. We Australians say that the stories of the past must be sung to the present so that the future can exist. And all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I feel like that's such an important piece to be able to really let sink in that all these ancient cultures understood that one of humans' unique roles was to be the voice of this planet, to sing, to speak, to chant this world into existence. It feels important when we're at a time when we're looking around at so many of people who are living in developed countries and our impact on the planet and this story of shame and blame that is coming through. And I always want to ask people, where is that story coming from and how is it impacting and influencing the stories that you create about our future? Because all the ancient religions understand that we have a very special role to play on this planet. And so, abracadabra, one of the oldest words on their planet, from the ancient Aramaic mysticism, I create as I speak. So, what is a story? Let's all get on the same page about that. What is a story? And I'm going to take a look at you. You can raise your hand. You can take yourself off mute. What is a story? And there's no right or wrong answer, right? We are story beings. So perhaps we can begin by beginning to listen to our intuition. You know, here we are in a group, and I invite you to put yourself on gallery view so you can actually get to see everyone for a few moments if you haven't done that. And as you look at everyone, you know, we are in this great collective of co-creating right now. You know, we're sharing an experience, a shared moment, a shared story. And so there's a moment when we are in this collective field, and we're co-creating, because that's what happens when you have the speaker and the listener. It's a field of co-creation, and there comes this moment when you might hear the life force come alive in you. It might start to knock at your door, and you might know that it's your turn to speak, but maybe you don't know what's going to come through you. So us extroverts, we know that we can take a deep breath and we're going to learn what we're going to speak as we say it. You know, but the introvert in us will say, "Oh, I have to know exactly what I'm going to say before I open my mouth and speak." You know, so I'm going to invite all of you to come into that attunement of listening to your intuition when you know it's your turn to speak. And even if you don't know, when you just feel that little pitter patter in your heart and it gets a little loud in your ears, and you don't know what you're supposed to say yet, though, that's when you get to call on eloquence. And eloquence is not being about clever or knowing exactly what to say or being strategic with your language. Eloquence is that piece where you're grounded to the earth, you're open to what is that voice, like that creative life force. Maybe it's the muse or the ancestors or that the the divine, whatever it is. It goes by so many different names, and you allow it to come through you. So in those moments, you can speak a little slower because maybe it comes through not at top speed. And so I invite that in our inquiry today as I ask, what is a story? And Carmela has said it's a transfer of knowing from self to others. It's a transfer. Okay, so now you've gotten into this language of it's a transmission. So something is coming straight through me to you. You know, this is if any of you are familiar with trauma work and the work of Thomas Hubel, you know, he speaks a lot about how as we can hold space for each other, that we literally transfer our vibration into another's. You know, so if we're holding fear, and if we are speaking a lot of fear and anxiety, you know, we're gonna send it out into the world. You know, but as storytellers, you know, one of the first questions I always ask as we begin to create our stories is I ask this one thing: what are you in service to? What are you in service to? And you're walking it without even thinking about it. This is just adding a fine attunement. You might be in service to, I'm going to be positive because I'm assuming that if you're coming towards me, you're into these kinds of things like peace and love and community and communion and truth, whatever truth is. Truth is a very complicated word, but a universal truth, a lifting of the veils, speaking to what's really there, allowing the shadow to be named and seen, but allowing for the wholeness, holy, etymology, the same word, to be there. So I speak all of this in terms of this transference that happens. So if I know that I am absolutely committed to being a place of sanctuary, a place where peace can come through, I can actually tell you a story about the Holocaust. I can be that record keeper of a wars from the past, but I'm telling it to you with a purpose of allowing peace to live here. Does that make sense? That all happens through that transference that I'm trying to Carmela spoke to. Siobhan's saying conveying an emotional experience, right? Right, and I would even go even so much further is that storytellers or actors, they're oftentimes are, and I'm very wary of using this language, but I'm going to use it because it's a term that's commonly understood. But I would say that they're the shamans of our time, you know and that what happens is that a lot of times there's this kind of, I told you about that magic that I felt in the room, and there is this magic that happens in the room, and one of the things that happens is that our brains start to connect, and there's a lot of science around this. It's called neural coupling or neural mirroring. And so when there's an emotional experience, of great jubilation, you're gonna, and I express that with so much joy, you're gonna get that expression. And when I go into grief or sadness or rage or anger, and I open those channels, it can open the same channels in you as well. And so in some ways, it's a place where we can tap into those feelings that we might not be able to access on our own, but we can through the realm of a story, through a movie, through TV. Um, Emma's saying a story is allowing belief and empathy to come into being. Right. That's one of the most extraordinary things about storytelling. And it really is magical in terms of, we talk about how do you change someone's opinion. It might not be through arguing, but what we have seen is through storytelling, people become more open and more empathetic towards other perspectives and other viewpoints, mostly because through a story, you get to actually have the expression of walking through another person's shoes. So there's some fascinating data that was done around particularly people of different sexual orientations. And they took a group of people and they said, are you open to people of different sexual orientations? And this particular group said, absolutely not at all. And they watched one television show about just an entertaining show where they got to see life through that perspective, and they became more open. And by the third television show of that same, content, they became accepting. So there wasn't an argument of this is the right thing to do or we should make space for different kinds of people or blah, blah, blah. It was much more of telling the story of that person and getting to see the world through that person's viewpoint. Um, and Donna is saying a story is a transmission of energy and information. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about story in a very unsexy way. Okay. Very unpoetic. A story, I also understand a story as an operating system. And it's an operating system that where we learn our values, our belief systems, and what we believe is possible. So now just start thinking back through time. Think about all the books that you read, all fairy tales, all the television programs, and start thinking about what did those stories, all the stories from your family, who your family is, you know, and what they believed is possible, and just start understanding what it is to have our worldview shaped by different stories and different cultures. And then I'm going to imagine that at some point in your life you broke out of one of those stories or two of those stories or three of those stories. And so there's something to me very liberating about being able to see the world. Oh, the world is made of stories. The story of COVID. Wow, we are living in the time of many stories happening at once, right? And this is something that no other culture has been asked to do. Usually cultures had a shared culture, they had a shared background and a shared belief system. And now we have thousands and millions all cohabitating together. This is an extraordinary time in life. So, right, how can we even retell the story right now? Right now, we're saying, "Oh my God, it's the worst time. It's apocalypse." Well, let's look at that language for a second. Apocalypse. Apocalypse is a Greek word, and it means the lifting of the veils. So lifting of the veils means that we can see what's really there. We're having that oh gosh, the Oz moment when you realize who's really running the show. So it's like the racism, the sexism, that all the things that we're seeing. It's not like those things weren't always there, but now we can see them more clearly. And now more than ever, our storytellers, our sacred storytellers, and our conscious creators are needed more than ever. Because what do we do? But we bring context and we help people make meaning. This is the danger of our news system right now, is that news just gives you information without context. And as storytellers, that's what we do. We help people see themselves in relationship to the past and the future, but even bigger than that, we give them a role to play. So, what's a sacred story? What's a sacred story? What's the distinction? I see some typing going on. I do love your voices too. Just so you know, your voices are welcome. Sacred story is universal, right? So it has that universal truth. John Steinbeck says your story must be about the reader, or it will not last. So that means okay. So you're like some of you are, I have spoke to one and tell your personal stories, and so there's I want to talk a little bit about that process. There are times when we tell our personal stories because, stories, and I can't get into the depth of this right now. I have a whole class where I teach about this called Mythos, but where stories can be a form of initiation. And we live in a time when our culture doesn't have a lot of recognized initiations. But telling our stories is one of the ways, one of our modern day initiatory paths. Because how we tell the story is how we live the story. And so there's a time when we tell our personal story, and it could be all about us. And there's something that needs to be witnessed, and that's part of our reflection, that's part of our integration, that's part of our healing. And we understand that collective witnessing is incredibly healing. We've learned this in South Africa, we've learned this in many different places. Now, then there comes this moment when the story is about someone else. And this is when you kind of enter into a new realm. This is when I say you're really stepping on as a sacred storyteller. As a sacred storyteller, you're telling not just to be seen or to be witnessed. You're doing this other thing. You're saying, I am stepping into the role as being someone of service, and I'm going to give you something. I'm going to give you the story that you can carry through. When we're looking at so much change happening in the world and so much transition, and the things, our relationship to things might start changing if they haven't already. What can people carry with them that is not relating to the outer definition of value that's based on consumerism? And I think a story can be carried through day and night, through any kind of storm. And it can be there to offer people tools and healing and medicine and those wildest of moments of time. Um, so right, it has that universal truth. So when I tell a story about me and I'm standing in sacred storytelling, I'm also understanding I'm telling it for you. So there's something about you in my story. Leslie Ash is saying a sacred story touches the divine, and it asks us to see the deepest threads of transformation, growth, and connection. Okay, and so what I love that it touches the divine, and I would go so far as to say it invites the divine to live inside of it. So a sacred story to me is it's not it's I think a lot of us are working with stories that have been built and they're on the take, right? These stories are there to tell us that we need something or that we want something or that we're less of something. A lot of stories, our marketing machine has really gotten hold of the story and has figured out how to use it against us. A sacred story is doing something else. It's there, it has that creative life force, and it's here to be in service. And it's in service of life thriving. So you're like, well, what does that mean? And what does that mean to have a sacred story? Why are we using that language, sacred? And I always say that as soon as we start using the word sacred, it's a setup. Because as soon as we call one thing sacred, we inherently are saying that something else isn't sacred, which is weird. Why is that mountain sacred and that one isn't? Why do I see the life and divine and honor and respect and revere the life in this being, but not in this one? But we have to use that language right now because that way and that practice of living, of seeing the life force and respecting and honoring the life force in all things is a practice that many of us are calling back into being. So we call on this language and we employ it to say, right, this is the way that I want to be in relationship with. So now when we start talking about a sacred story, we're saying a story that has the divine that lives inside of it, and that it's here in service of life. So now start thinking about all the different stories in your world, and think about the last time you watched a television show or heard a story from someone, and did you feel kind of that sense of exalted, infused, inspired, enlivened, or are you feeling a little dead to the world? And so the opposite of what I would say of a sacred story is a zombie story. And a zombie story is a story that's on the take. So here's an example of a zombie story. Zombie story, an example of it is Jaws. Jaws was written by Peter Benchley. It was produced by Steven Spielberg. Whenever you're going to go into the realm of studying stories, then I want to invite you to say, okay, uh, when was that story created? What was it in service to? And what were its creators in service to? I don't know what Peter Benchley was thinking when he wrote that story, but I do know that Steven Spielberg really wanted to be a famous, director. And so they went out, they made that film on the ocean. It was the very first film that was ever shot on the ocean. So now we're dealing with something right off the bat, which is about that collective unconsciousness and our understanding of symbols. And symbols is the oldest language. And what is the ocean? But it represents our consciousness. And now we have this thing called a shark, and it breaks in the movie set. And so now they're smart producers, and they just show fragments of it. So the shark, it goes straight into our symbolic memory and understanding of being representing our fear of the unknown and our fear of death. Oldest story on the world is known that we know of is about humans' fear of death. So now we've got a very dangerous situation because the story has implanted this great fear and it's associated the shark with these things. And it became publicly acceptable to kill off this keystone species, the species that's actually very important to our own health and well-being. When Peter Benchley discovered how dangerous his story was and its impact on the consciousness of people around the globe, he spent the rest of his life becoming a protector of the oceans. And so this is a cautionary tale. I don't think that there's a bunch of people out there trying to write zombie stories, but I do think that this is a moment in time when we have this opportunity to understand the power of our word, the power of our language, the power of our stories. And what does it mean to be a conscious creator once you understand that? And what does it mean to be someone that stands at the threshold of becoming a sacred storyteller, of telling stories with intention and purpose? Any questions, any thoughts on all of this so far? I'm going to tell you a little story. I've never told anyone this story.
I would just like to say, Leah,
Go on.
I would just like to say that I love your language. I love the way that you communicate to open my mind into words. So I really appreciate what you're saying. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. You never know. You just never know. I'm sitting here staring at all of you guys. And so one of the things that happens in all of this, and I'll give you a little piece on working with communities and audiences, is you're always you're watching them, because the people who are, some people call them an audience. I call them the co-creators. And what I did was I did a couple things to prepare you today, and I want to pick these apart now so that you can be aware of this as you come to the threshold of telling your own stories. Is I gave you a job at the very beginning. Well, I did first thing. I called you into presence. I invited you into being present. So I invited you to come into yourself, to close your eyes, to call back all your energy, right? I also then gave you a task. I gave you a task to listen for yourself, as if something that you need could be spoken today directly to you. You know. And so what are those things that it's doing is that I'm inviting our energy fields to connect. And then I've got my eyes on you. I'm not just staring at myself, up, talking to myself. I've got my eyes on you. So when there are moments when and there's a little flutter in the room, so I can see when you get a little distracted. And so then I orient and I shift and I change, and I understand that something's a little bit offline. So I say this as sort of an advanced piece of, when we're storytellers, where we are so attuned to the people that we're talking a story about, because it's always about them, it's for them. This to me is the distinction about someone who is a sacred storyteller, who was in that position to give, who's stepping onto the path of elderhood, versus someone with their stages who just needs to have their story heard. And that is very valuable. It's something a little bit different. Okay, so I want to show you this story because it just tickles me pink, and here we are. So I am doing something right now called a listening tour, and I set out on this. I had thought for myself, my dream of being was going to be to next year, for my own personal study. I wanted to go sit with a lot of the old ancient oral indigenous cultures and story, just to get the transmission, to feel what it is to sit with them and to receive those stories. And I thought I was going to go on this global tour 2021. Well, that's a good laugh now. We all know that it doesn't look like any travel is going to be happening next year. So I realized that there was an opportunity to listen to the people of my own country, especially when there's so much conflict and strife and upset. And I really do believe that story is one of the main keys to healing these times. And so the listening tour just came alive, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to listen to the indigenous stories of this time that are holding the keys and the guidance to carry us through, and thriving, not just surviving. And also listening to people all along the way, knowing that wisdom lives in all cultures and all communities. And how do we surface this how do we bring this to the surface? So this is one of the stories that I want to tell you about. So this just came straight out of Santa Fe. And I was meeting with this woman, and she was from a fourth generation Spanish family, Spanish colonizing of this community of Santa Fe. It's a very complicated history there. And she said, and I thought I was meeting with her because she could introduce me to people in my interview. And she says, "Can I bring my husband?" I said, "Of course, whoever you want to bring." So we go to their coffee shop, and I just quickly discovered that I'm actually in a DJ school. Their coffee shop is also a DJ school, and her husband is of the Laguna Pueblo, and he's sitting in the back, and he's doing the whole like giving me the stink eye thing, which I don't know if you've ever had this opportunity of being assessed up. I quickly realized that I'm being assessed up, and I'm getting stink eye, and I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know what I've walked in myself into. And they're asking me, and she's asking all these questions, and all of a sudden, some point in him, he decides he approves, and he comes forward, and he says, "I will never tell any stories, any old stories from my culture, none." He's like, "I'm doing everything I can to disconnect myself from those old stories. They're dangerous." And so we start talking about this, and what does it mean to have that happen. And he's speaking a little bit about the sense um, that the people who have carried those stories, they've been forced underground, they've been colonized, that these stories are not even in the same form that they once were. And he said not all stories are meant to keep being repeated. There's a point when you put them down. We started talking about, well, what about the new story? Like, if a new story is just based on disconnecting from the old stories, does it carry the wisdom, or is it just a discombobulated force? And we ended up in this conversation. And then he starts telling me about what he does. And this man works with indigenous young youth to teach them how to DJ. And he's talking about basically that there isn't a place for shamans in our modern day world, and he's teaching them how to be shamans of the dance floor, because that's where they can exist in these days. And I start laughing. because I was like, you realize that you are actually living one of the prophecy stories, which is from the White Buffalo Woman, which is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story that I recommend that you go hear. But part of that, at the end of that story and at the end of that prophecy, it says that when all the people of all different colors can dance and sing together, we will have peace on earth. I said, you're actually living the new story. You're actually living the prophecy. So I just wanted to carry that story forward because it's one thing when we have them and I feel like the magic of the storyteller is that we see through the dimensions into that mythic dimension. And so I wanted to invite us just to, I'm going to finish by asking you, talk about what is a myth. I'm going to give you a little recipe to create your own story. And then for those who want to carry forward, I'll tell you a little bit about how we can play together. So I just want to talk about what is a myth, because this is this a great piece of this marriage. The story that I just told you is a marriage of being able to see the mythos and how it's playing out in this dimension. And that, as storytellers, is possibly one of the most magical things that we can give people, is this their access back to that kind of language, this multi-dimensional framework of seeing the world. So what is a myth? Does anyone want to play at what a myth is? A myth is a story that has no author. It is a wild and free and liberated being that has never been enslaved by language and forced to be one role only for its entire life. That's one way of expressing what a myth is. Another version of discussing what a myth is a myth is the language speaking out loud. So you'll hear these creation stories that come from all land-based cultures that are the myths that tell us about how the world came into being. And it's understood that that's actually the word. What did we begin with? But the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into being, and that those myths is an explanation of how the world came into being that comes through humans, and it's our understanding that comes alive through that deep listening and allowing that listening to come and emerge and be spoken through us. So we're lived by and through those stories. So if we understand what that myth is, I couldn't help but go into that language and into that place. So here's a story. I know that some of you guys came because you want to be that you are writers and you're ready to tell your own stories. And so I'm going to give you a way to tell your own uh, wisdom story. So you start with a really sucky moment. This is a time in your life and you don't want to go back. You repeat that definition. A myth a myth is technically a myth is a story that has no author. It's the technical expression of it. And then for people, that was it. That was the first one. Okay. Um, so your wisdom story, you're coming to a moment where you might not feel like you've got a lot of wisdom about the situation right now, but that's okay because wisdom's cultivated over time, right? So we're going back to this moment where it really sucked. It's far enough away, 6 months to 3 years. You've got some perspective on it, and you don't have to be right. It's a very key piece to a wisdom story. Because remember, we're telling a sacred story. So when we're talking about a sacred story, now all of a sudden it's as if you are developing this wild collaboration with the muse where the story can now speak to you and speak through you. So you're not going to tell the exact same story over and over and over again. If I'm going to tell you the story about my car crash, I'm not going to tell you about it over and over and over in the same way. Now I'm bringing context and meaning. Now I'm bringing a story to you. Okay. Now I'm making a story that's about an initiation. So now I'm going to invite you to look at that really sucky time in life as an initiation. And now we're going to look at it through that lens, and we're going to allow the story to reveal something to you about it that you didn't know, which means that I'm going to invite you to approach it in a state of awe and wonder as if you don't know this story. So what you're doing is, and this is my favorite part of sacred storytelling, is you get to give your ego the day off. You don't have to know how to do it, okay? You don't even have to know the story. All you have to do is go in with a clear intention. What is your intention? What are you in service to? Why do you feel called to share this story? You're paying it forward, backwards and forwards, okay? So this really crazy moment. Now, we're going to go back because the archetype of the storyteller is the spider. And so the spider is a multidimensional being. So, and we're connecting the dots. The stories are not linear, although they have a beginning, middle, and end. They can do all different kinds of things in them, right? And so, with this one, I want to invite you to think about, where does the story really begin? When I tell the story of when I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, that story does not begin on the day when I was sitting across from a doctor in a cold, sterile hospital room. That story begins when I was 4 years old. I used to have this beautiful tapestry that had been hand woven by a friend of my mother's, and it was of this woman who was giving flowers away to the children in her neighborhood. And embroidered in this tapestry said Leah. And it had my name embroidered right into the tapestry. It said, Leah, give what you have. To others, it may mean more than you dare to think. And I was just a wee little thing, and I was trying to figure out how to read, and those words were imprinting on me, even though I had no idea what they meant, until I was 29 years old, sitting across the desk from this doctor who was telling me that I had a very advanced case of thyroid cancer, and they were going to cut across my throat, and there was a very good chance I could lose my voice. And that's when I knew what I had. Okay, so that's an example, right? We don't necessarily, we're bringing meaning and context to a large story that we're living, and we're connecting all the pieces into this great journey. And so when you go in to ask that question, where does my story really begin? You're not figuring it out. This is not a scrunch your eyebrows kind of moment. This is a get up, go for a walk, take a shower, plant some seeds in the garden, walk the dog, listen. Don't put earbuds in your ears when you go for those walks. This is deep, great listening time. And so allow it to come to you, because you're doing this collaborative relationship with your muse. So let her put her to work. Then, where does your story really begin? Now you're looking for that universal theme. That universal theme is this piece of, this story is not about you. This is a universal story. This story is about the human collective. And now you're looking at it through the initiation, and you say, okay, now you're speaking to the story as if it's an initiation, which all humans go through. So for me, my initiation was about something that you might not know about me, is that before this time, I was like a professional victim. I knew how to play the victim role. I could out victim story anybody in the room. And all of a sudden, here was this doctor coming to me with like this big, purple, beautiful, cushiony pillow with the queen, the tiara of victimhood that he was just offering me. And I did not want to play that role anymore. And when I decided that, in that moment, it was as if there was an escape hatch that just opened up in the room, and I dove through, not knowing what was on the other side, but that I was not going to be that anymore ever again. And something in me made a choice in that moment, in that split moment of a second. And the way that I met the day completely changed. And it turns out, for a little while, my new role was to start laughing and to start cracking jokes. And my new job was not to have people feel sorry for me. My new job was to bring life and fun and play into every room that I walked into, with every doctor, with every blood transfusion, with every single thing. My job was to make people laugh. It was a new way of being in the world. So again, that's just a slight example of what what happened, what came alive in you. You might not have been able to know it or name it or understand it in the moment, and perhaps it's just in the reflection, the looking back, the making sense of it all, that you're like, oh my God, this happened. I couldn't have told you any of that at the time. It wasn't until years later that I could understand that this major shift happened. And what you're doing is you're kind of throwing breadcrumbs back to people behind you. I made it through the minefield. I know a thing or two about how to get through. So the next thing that you want to look to in your story is, who was your Magi? Who is your Yoda? Who is your fairy godmother? And there's always someone outside the family system who calls you into being. It's a key part in every story. It's a key part in many lives. And so start thinking about, who are the people or who are the things that got you through. In my situation, it was a beautiful garden. There was this garden that I co-created with a bunch of my friends when I got out of the hospital, and it was 70 feet of circular garden. And every morning I would walk that garden. and I would say my gratitude. And I do not know where I learned how to do gratitude from. It was not popular. Oprah wasn't talking about it. I really believe that garden called me into a place of how to be grateful for life. And as I walked out of the spiral, and I will tell you that after that operation, I sunk into a deep, deep, deep depression. And that garden is what got me through. Because as I walked out of the spiral, each time I prayed for my life. I didn't pray before then. I didn't know how to pray. But I believe in my heart of all hearts that those prayers are what brought me here to you on this day. So again, what are you doing? But you're beginning to make sense of and bring context and meaning to your life experience, and you're feeding it as nourishment. And you're giving people not necessarily the A to Z instructions, but you're providing them a way of looking at life so that when those moments come alive in them, they have something to call on. So, how do you end a story? You end a story. It takes craft. It takes skill. It takes practice. But I want to. You can write this story in 10 minutes right after this class. I invite you to write your wisdom story in 10 minutes. Just bullet point it out. And the way that you can end it real quick is through a story blessing. A story blessing. I learned this from Carolyn Casey. She learned it from John O'Donohue, beautiful mystic poet. He got this from the Kabbalah tradition, and it's if when. So you take a metaphor of your story, and then you place it into a little blessing. So if you find yourself out on a dark and stormy night in the center of the ocean and your ship is sunk and all seems lost, and fear is circling around you in such a big, thick way that you're sure any moment you will drown and never be seen or heard of again, then may the light of the moon pass through all those clouds that clear. And as the light of the moon strikes the ocean, may she light it up so all can be seen, and so your way to shore is easeful and graceful and even elegant. So just a little short example of you bless the people. You bless you bless people with a little blessing at the end of your story, and then they don't even know that you didn't finish it, but you finished it. You brought them to a place and you gave them a journey, and then they've been washed over with the goodness of you. And it's a gift to give. So that is our story today. Yes, Lorna.
Hi, Leah. I'm so inspired by your work and by your storytelling.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. You see, I'm in my car. Uh, Here's the thing, Leah. I don't feel like I've gotten to the other side of the initiation.
Hmm.
I feel stuck in the middle of something.
Yeah.
Uh, and I have felt stuck for a while. Part of it is I'm really feeling the the trauma of my ancestors who died in the camps, and COVID. I was brought up in one of the typical Holocaust families where they said we lost a lot of relatives in the camps and nothing more. I'm sure I asked, but nobody told me more. So basically, I grew up around ghosts, and they seem to have inhabited me. Um, and I'm very much still in victim. Oh man, big time. Um, and I'll try not to go on too long, but I feel like I might have been died in the camps actually and turned around quickly. And I might have been a Nazi because I was born in 45.
Okay.
So it feels like the story is still in germination or something. Yeah. So what do you recommend?
I just love. I thank you so much for bringing this to us, and I love just your awareness about it. And what I would recommend for you is a medicine story. You know, a medicine story for me is that story you go in to write to discover the healing for it all. And so, you know, like I said, the wisdom story is like you're on the other side of it, and you so eloquently said, "I'm not on the other side of this. I'm deep in it, and I'm in it, even in a role that I don't want to be in anymore." So, in that situation, what I would do is a medicine story is so oftentimes it's that place of discovery where we go to try to figure it out. And what I love to do in these kinds of situations and place things in the mythic dimension. This is where I feel like you can do some serious fast forward healing. And I'm wary of this language. I'm just going to use healing rather than transformation, but I felt the impulse, but let's not go that far. Let's just say that healing can happen there. And please notice my humble approach to this, because I feel like you do have to approach this in a humble way, that nothing should be assumed, but that when we have a real strong intention and desire, then that's where the magic and the mystery can come alive in us. So when you have this situation, let's say that, and I do teach a class called on this specific thing of how to deal with traumatic situations, and it's called Tell a Bigger Story, and I'll be running it in November. Um, but what you do is you specifically take that really tough situation, you place it in the mythic dimension. Okay, this is where we have this all the archetypal energies. Now we're in the language of symbol, and we're in the language of metaphor. What is language of metaphor? What is metaphor? But it's the language of spirit. Okay, so now we get to get it. We get to I don't want to say depersonalize, because that sounds like we're cutting off from it. What we're doing is we're beginning to get access to our multidimensional selves. So what you can do is you can take that really hard situation and you can say, and this is where I'm going to do some very fast forward thinking with you guys. What's the landscape? So what landscape does this story live in? And just allow yourself to click and poof, whatever you see. This is a trusting of your intuition. This is the hardest thing that I see people have challenges with. It's just trusting what they see, feel, or sense. We all do it in different ways. Okay, so if you just thought ocean, great. Oh, I don't live in the ocean. That can't be me. No, no, no. Whatever that I don't know voice, let's just put that aside. So if ocean was the first thing, great. Your story takes place in the ocean. Okay. Now, what character? How do I show up in the mythic dimension? Oh, okay. I saw a snake. I don't want to be a snake. That's not very sexy. No, ignore that voice, okay? It's like exactly what you see, your first impulse. Allow yourself to trust that, and then allow that, and then whatever your other person is that you are in relationship with. This is a complicated one, Lorna, and we'd have to work much longer on this, but I'm just giving this sense of how you can place your situation in the mythic dimension. I recommend not doing more than 2 other characters because it can get complicated. So now you have a sense of what is this scenario, how does it play out on the mythic dimension, right? Maybe you do show up as a Nazi, who knows? My sense is that you allow yourself now to enter into a field of play, a field of discovery. Your job is not to replicate your story in the mythic dimension, but allow yourself to see how these different energies relate there and how the world unfolds. I have seen people have revelatory experiences. I have gone to these medicine stories with broken hearts, about situations that I can't understand or can't find find peace and resolution with, and I'll take it and I'll write it in this space, and all of a sudden the story starts talking to me, and the different dynamics, the things that I can't see in my human egoic form start to fall away, and all of a sudden I can hear the truth, or the different situations that I can't necessarily hear any other way. And I find this as a fast forward way of integrating things that we might have a hard time integrating otherwise. I just gave you guys an example, a 2-minute example of something that I usually do in an 8-hour class. So if it's not making complete sense, don't worry. But I would say that is, I love working with story as a form of healing something that's unresolved. One thing I'll say about this, because we just entered into the world of talking about trauma things, if you choose to do this and you choose to do it in a personal narrative, so in a nonfiction way, they say don't do it for more than 20 minutes at a time if you're dealing with something that's traumatic, because you can do it for up to 20 minutes and you enter into a reflective zone and you can start to make sense and make connections. If you do it for more than 20 minutes and it's very traumatic, you can start to go into reopening that old wound, and you can actually re-engage in that. And that's not what you'd have to do in this kind of work. You don't have to go back. What storytelling is, stories are like trees. They're designed to grow. They are designed to fill out. They're not designed to stay the same, just like you aren't designed to stay the same. So you don't want to keep going back to the same story and repeating it over and over again, because you aren't the same person as what happened when that situation first started. Okay, was not planning on talking about that, but thank you, Lorna, for opening that territory of conversation.
Leah, I just wanted to say, it feels like we're living in mythic times, and Why don't you teach a course on, I don't know, COVID and storytelling or something? Because I feel like COVID now and all around it is really bringing up my deepest wounds.
Yeah,
And yeah, thank you so much.
you're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so this was our class for today. You've got the ingredients for a medicine story. You've got the hints for a wisdom story, for a wisdom story for a medicine story. If you feel complete and you have enough to go work with, I invite you to go on and prosper and write your stories. If you want to learn a little bit more about how to work with me, I'm going to take just about 4 or 5 minutes and give you some ideas about how you can work with me. And one thing is I do have is I have a book of, I think it's 33 prompts. So if you're just looking for some creative prompts just to get yourself going, uh, I'm sure one of the emails that will go out will be sent to you about that. So one thing that's happening that starts next Tuesday is a course called Sanctuary. And this course is truly born out of COVID. And it really came from this idea of, wow, when the world is falling apart, what are we creating? And who are we as creators? And what new worlds are being asked to be born through us? And what new roles are asked to come alive? But first off, where do we begin? And where we began was what became really clear was this idea of sanctuary. So this is a 6-week class that is designed to take you on a journey into coming into relationship as a sacred storyteller and how to cultivate your relationship with I'm going to use that word, the divine. And we do it through developing personalized rituals, through ceremony, if you feel called to do that, and all the while working with story as a tool for healing and transformation, both for your individuals and for the collective. And so this is to me like a game on class where you're like, okay, game on, folks. You know, we're like the world needs us. And what is in the way of giving your greatest gifts? And this class is really designed to take the lid off and help liberate that part of you, and then activate your creative life force, which will come through your stories, your creativity, and all parts of your life. So the thing that came through this also is really understanding. And what we do in this class is we get you get it's actually like 100-page guidebook to understanding your how to create your creator matrix. And so your creator matrix is sort of like it's the owner's manual to how your system and how you work as a creator. It will help you really quickly identify what your blocks are, what your strengths are, what your gifts are, and it's really designed to help you start to gallop. So it's like when you know what the barriers are and what those things are in your way, and you can spot them from a mile away, you can get some good momentum so you can jump over them. And that's what this class is really designed to do. And it's also just designed honestly to bring beauty, to bring joy, to bring a lot of pleasure into our lives at this time. And for me, one of my big questions is, what will hold us through times of great transition? What will feed and nourish us? And this class is truly designed to be one of those sources that will most serve this time. So the way that it works is that we meet for 6 Tuesdays from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific time, and those are live classes. You also get your private group, your group of greatness, and that is a group of people that you will meet with outside of class. And we're going to be doing this physical task together. It's not conceptual. This is the other thing I love about the story. You will get a physical task of creating a sacred space in your home, in your space. And I have seen people, people that did this. I want to say some people were able to do this in their homes. Some people had to do it on a shelf. Some people did it outside. Some people were traveling. So don't, if you're feeling in your bones that sanctuary is for you, and coming into doing this work of really understanding who you are as a creator and liberating the medicine that you have to give to this time and having a way and a vehicle to do it with is calling you. Don't let that part of, I don't know how to transform a place in my home, get in your way, because I can tell you after our first group went through, a lot of them did it and a lot of them didn't, and they all really walked away with something out of the class. So it was a mystery for me. At first, I said, I don't know if you can take this class if you can't transform a physical space in your home. And you're like, wait, it's a storytelling class and it's a redesigning class? I don't quite understand. And what I can tell you is that at the beginning of COVID, I had to go follow my own creative life force. as everything was going. And it took me into and through this process. And as I began to create this process, and as I began to transform a space in my room into truly a sanctuary, I started to see who I was as a creator. But most important to me was I got to see all my blocks, all my barriers, all the things that were in the way. And it almost made me weep because I tell you, I've been a professional creator for over 25 years. And when I all of a sudden could see some of the things that were in the way that I had never been able to see in less than 48 hours, that's what really inspired me to put this into an actual class. And so that I could share it with other people, because I was like, wow, I don't want you to have to wait 20 years to discover what I discovered, like especially if you can get it in 2 days. So it really goes under that idea of as above, so below, as without, so within, and it gives you a very physical way to see how you operate in the world, and then you have the time to integrate the changes and to really get to really put it into practice so that you can really have an experience of going on a journey and coming out in a different place in how you live in the world at the end of these 6 weeks. The other thing that you have is 5 bonus classes with amazing guest teachers. And this is the story that I told you, White Buffalo Woman. That story is told by Brooke Medicine Eagle. And she tells that story and brings us into this idea of what is ritual, what is it to come into relationship with the sacred. And then there's also classes by Indigenous elders out of Hawaii. There's classes that will lead you in creating a sacred symbol for your space. And so all of this was really designed to do that. And I'm going to uh, oh gosh, there's a very good chance that I'm going to get kicked out of this in about in just 2 minutes. So I'm going to leave you with that right now, just because that is sanctuary. And there's another class called the Artemis Circle. This is an advanced class for people who really know that they want to be leaders and facilitators in storytelling. And this is for a very small group of 13 people, and you'll have an opportunity to get to do personal projects. We're going to do a community healing story ceremony for a collective, and you also get to have an experience of telling your own solo story. So you're going to get an email with links from all of this. And so if you have any questions, you can definitely ask away. And then the other thing I do is a form of mystical storytelling, and I do something called soul stories. And these are private one-on-one sessions where it's a form of divination, actually. It's a very old, ancient kind of storytelling where I divine your story as it's living in the mythic dimension. And so you receive a song and a story, and then we unfold the story and we make sense of it. And that is at medicinestories.com. And the question is, let's see here. Their books are, I have not published this book yet. This book I've only been keeping for students of Sanctuary, but I will. It's going to be called The Conscious Creator's Guide to Psychic Silence is the name of the 100-page workbook, and I will be it'll probably come out for the general public in a couple of months. Oh. Any other questions? Okay. Well then, Sharda, I see your hand up. Do you have a question? All right. I'm going to leave you with a quote, and then we can all bid each other adieu. Okay. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's from Martha Graham. Martha Graham was the mother of modern dance, and it goes like this. There is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action, and because there is only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost. The world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable, nor how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours clearly and directly, to keep your channel open. You do not even have to believe in yourself for it to work. You have to keep yourself open and aware to the urges that motivate you. keep the channel open. So that is by Martha Graham. So I wish you adieu. We can take ourselves off mute. If you have any questions, feel free to email them to info@leahlamb.com. And until we meet again.
Thank you.
Bye now. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Beautiful.
very much.
Thank you, Leah.
Yeah.